Emergency podcast. It's a live podcast. Emergency podcast. Not a real live podcast. There are people in the room.
Thank you, Jack. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I never thought anybody would ever come to a live podcast, so I'm astounded. Jeremy said they would. He's always more confident than me, as you know. Oh, just to make clear, I'm Alan, he's Jeremy. We don't like to be confused. So, as Jess just said, what we're going to do, we're kind of slightly hedging our bets. We were worried for a while that this live emergency podcast might happen in the middle of an actual emergency. But as far as we know, he hasn't gone yet. But if he does, shout out and we can adapt to that. What we're going to do is we're going to talk for a little bit about what's just happened, so the elections and what that might mean and what we can learn from that. Then we'll go to a bit of discussion about that. Then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the future of the Union, of the Greens, and of the left generally. So that's the kind of idea of the evening. And we're going to try, the song would have said, we promise not to talk for hours. Don't we, Jeremy?
Well, depends what you mean by hours.
Well, don't turn it into some kind of all-night happening.
There'll be more than 1 hour.
I've got a train to catch.
Okay.
So, but I'm going to start by asking a question, sort of for both of us, but I'll get Jeremy's answer first, which is, did anything that happened in the elections on Thursday and the results on Friday, did anything surprise you?
Mainly I was surprised that I thought the Greens were going to do better. I think at one point, actually, on the podcast, I said I thought they were going to get 2,000 seats, which obviously isn't what I meant. I'd been looking at some projection, which based on what they would get if every seat was being contested, and they got over 20%. And I think I thought they would. And I think we know why I thought that, because I live in Waltham Forest. So Waltham Forest was the big success no one was really expecting. So I was just going from the vibes in Waltham Forest, which is there was intense campaigning in a few wards, but there wasn't anything like the sense of kind of massive mobilisation there was in places like Haringey and Lewisham, and everybody was just quietly planning to vote Green. So I thought that would be happening everywhere, and it turned out it wasn't. It was just Walthamstow and Hastings. So, and in terms of the bigger result, though, obviously we're going to talk about this a lot, but the weakness of the Green vote, even in the northern towns, surprised me. I think people have talked up a bit the idea that what's happening is, well, the Green vote went up and that took votes away from Labour. It's not that wasn't happening in any of the specific ward results I've looked at, and I've been poring over the northern towns. And Reform Reform got well over the Labour and Green vote combined in many, many places. So I would say that was the surprise for me, actually. What about you?
So, I'll pick something very specific, since you've given a big picture, which is, in Norwich, where I live, the Greens swept the board mostly, and that wasn't entirely a surprise. Took the city council and some of the county council seats, so the county council was now predominantly Reform. But the big thing that caught my attention was Great Yarmouth, and everyone's paying attention to that. But Great Yarmouth, which is where Rupert Lowe is the MP, every seat went to his Great Yarmouth First, which is really his Restore UK seat, which is kind of understandable if you know Yarmouth, actually, but also kind of horrifying at the same time that there was such a solid vote for what a party that makes Reform look moderate. And that will be to some extent very local and specific, the situation in Yarmouth and Lowe's presence there. He spends a lot of time there. I've not seen it, but they tell me he drinks a lot in the Witherspoons and hangs out with people. Whether or not he can replicate that in other local areas, I don't know, but I can see a situation where the momentum is there for them to take parts of the East Coast, and I think that's a big concern. But surprising is different to important. So what was the most important thing that we should take from it?
Well, I think we've just been talking about this in the part now, so I think
don't give away all our secrets.
I'm just stealing your thing. I think we both agreed that really, following on from what I said, and also from what you just said, that what's really striking is the split nationally. Okay, what I would say most important is, I'm afraid, whether we like it or not, what the local elections showed is neither the Greens nor your party are going to be able to stop the rise of Reform in the Red Wall. So we're back to a situation where the only option preventing reform taking over the post-industrial north is some kind of restoration of the left in the Labour Party. So that's just where we are.
We'll discuss that and see what we think. But I think that's right. It's the fact that reform didn't break through quite as well as they are pretending to have done. They've hit the ceiling, which is good. The Greens didn't get quite as high as they were expecting, as we might have been hoping. And so the fragmentation seems complete across the spectrum in England, plus then in Wales and Scotland. Nobody can win. And that seems to me that's a really risky situation for a polity on the one hand, because no government can win sufficient consent and support to actually get anything done. On the other hand, it creates opportunities for good people and bad people to push things through without big support. So I think it has risks, but it has opportunities. And that's where I think the question comes at about how does one think about this, not just from the point of view of a party, but from the point of view more broadly of a radical or progressive political culture. How does it operate in that situation where it can't command a majority, even though most people support it rather than support the fascists? And I don't have a clear answer to that question, but that seems to be the question it poses.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. I mean, it's pretty clear there's going to have to be, if we don't want a reform government, some people just do. There's a whole section of people on the left who, whether they're willing to say it out loud or not, have a sort of accelerationist perspective. They want a reform government because they think that will help, and they think that only if you completely destroy the Labour Party, we can then finally get whatever the thing is they think they're going to get on the other side of that. But we can talk about that as a proposition if we want to. But I think, if we care about stopping a reform government, then there's going to have to be there, as ever, even more than ever, there's going to have to be some pretty broad coalition. I'd say on the other hand, though, there's quite a lot of optimism to be drawn about the possibility of some sort of broad coalition from the fact, well, they're not really. I think there's a pretty clear role for the Labour Party now, which is going to be to try to counter reform in the small town, in the mill towns and the industrial regions. I think Labour's obviously finished in the big cities, and the big cities can be left to the Greens from Labour's point of view. So I think there's a potential situation. We could well be looking at a situation where a Labour leader will be thought to have done well if Labour gets 30% of the vote. And it doesn't really matter. It mustn't be seen as a priority to contest the Greens in places like Waltham Forest. So, and that is more, in a way, that presents an opportunity for a sort of coalition politics, at least, where there wouldn't be one if there was more confusion over where the different forces are strong and weak.
So we'll come back to some of that in terms of the future after we've had our kind of discussion break. But let's just try and step back and put all of this into sort of larger, longer historical socioeconomic context. Because at one level it feels to me like this fragmentation has been entirely to be expected for a long, long time. As everybody knows, it's happening across Europe. It's wiped out some of the versions of the Labour Party in other countries, in France most obviously, but elsewhere. So this is part of a much broader European-wide trend of party fragmentation that I thought was going to happen earlier in the UK than it did. But I think Brexit, in its weird way, delayed it, because Brexit redrew the boundaries for Leave and Remain and delayed the fragmentation that's now come back with full force. But then the question will be, well, why is that happening? Is that something to be understood as just a kind of inevitable working out of social change, or to be understood as to do with the ways in which political choices have been made, the ways in which since 79, right, the famous Eric Hobsbawm piece, "The Forward March of Labour Halted," is about Labour will not be able to sustain its position of power from a working class that is declining, industrial working class that is declining. So is this just something that's really been happening all our lives, with kind of a almost inevitable working out?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay, good. So
the British. Look, the party system. Firstly, the two-party system never got fully established in Britain. It was a perpetual fantasy of Labourist culture that Labour was always on the verge of fully occupying the electoral space to the left of the Tories, and it never happened because the Liberals stubbornly refused to completely die. They retained At the lowest, they went down to about 5% of the vote, and they were largely only active in places that just really hadn't been through the Industrial Revolution, really, like parts of the West Country, the Scottish Islands, etc. But they came back, and they started to come back in the early 70s. It's not an accident they start to come back in the early 70s. This is because really the two-party system is an artifact of the era of Fordism, the era of mass culture, the era of when both the Tories and Labour had millions of members, when being conservative became almost coterminous with being middle class, and Labour was understood to be the party of the working class, which was never true. I mean, there was a very brief historical window when Labour even got a clear majority of working class votes, but its electorate was always historically a coalition of the sort of professional salariat and the working class. But that's been going for decades, and I think as anyone who's listened to us or read us like for years will know. I mean, some of us have been trying to point out that the two-party system was gone, and like we couldn't behave as if it wasn't, like since the SDP split in the early 80s. And so no, I think that long-term fragmentation of the party system is obviously, on some level, it's just a natural reflection of the fact that society's become more fragmented, more complex. The experience of class and class composition has become more complex for people than it was like in the 50s, and that's reflected in the way people treat political parties. But obviously in a way, I think what needs more explaining is kind of what happens in 2017, because I don't think that can even be explained fully by Brexit, because there was a bunch of leavers who voted for Corbyn in 2017. So 2017 was the great moment when the polarisation was kind of suddenly back, partly because the Lib Dems had totally collapsed because of the experience of the coalition, partly because there did seem to be this strong ideological divide. And I think, and I also think, well, I also think it's also because, in 2017, Labour was able to hold together that, in a way, it was able to recompose its 1960s coalition, actually, because lots of so-called traditional Labour voters voted Labour, partly because the manifesto said that free movement would end, which is something they'd wanted for a long time, and Labour wasn't seen as opposing it in 17. So that was this really weird moment. But like even before 2017, like I said, I think it was an article in Jacobin in 2015 or 16, I said Corbynism itself is part of the breakup of the British party system. Like you have to understand that Corbynism is part of that process of breakup. What it won't lead to is a restoration of 20th century mass politics. So I mean, for all those reasons, I think it's really, none of it's surprising. And I mean, essentially, lots of people have been saying for decades that the British party system is like uniquely maladapted to just give it, allowing the plurality of political perspectives in the country to have any kind of institutional expression, and it was always going to break sooner or later. But I don't think you're going to disagree with any of that. Cause
do I get to say, yeah, I agree with all that?
Yeah, you do.
Okay, that's your catchphrase.
It is one of my catchphrases.
No, I don't.
I'm such an amenable chap.
I don't disagree with all that. But I think that of the different fragments that the system is breaking into, geographical, national, occupational, etc., it strikes me that the result partly is indicative of the way it's also fracturing generationally. In that, my sense, from the data, but also from talking to people, is that what's happening is there's just an ever larger generation that was never socialised or indoctrinated, if you want, into the two-party system, and has no particular natural, cultural, let alone economic reason to be attached to one of those parties. And I think you said that was fragmenting already in the 70s and 80s, but that was still dominated the way people thought about and acted in politics. Whereas that seems to be completely broken. So Wales, I think, is an interesting example in that context. So I lived in Wales for 10 years. And what was really striking, even sort of when did I move there, at the start of the millennium, was the way which Labour had such a kind of hegemony over Wales, culturally as well as in terms of electoral success, through the trade unions, which also provided a large cultural context within which Welshness, in part, not exclusively, of course, became so closely articulated with the Labour Party and with trade unionism, in sort of contention with cultural forms of nationalism and linguistic nationalism that were present, and clearly important in parts of the northwest of the country. but there was a sense in which to be Welsh was to be part of the labour and trade union movement. They were still active in the 2000s, even kind of libraries, social associations that just dominated it. And clearly that's utterly collapsed, partly because of internal reasons and the behaviour of people in the Senate, but also I think because it's a mark of the inability of the Labour Party to reproduce that hegemony. So it means nothing to people other than whatever it's doing on the TV in terms of politics. It's not embedded in any broader form of life. And I think it's the same thing for the Conservatives. So to switch to Norfolk, where I live now, I can talk about places other than where I've lived. There, the Conservative Party has also collapsed for reform. And you would think that should be arch-Tory land. The Queen lives there. It's a lot of aristocratic feudal villages. There are villages. I met somebody once whose job was to be the keeper of the Queen's, something to do with water flowing down some river or something. There's these kind of people, yeah. But they collapsed, and I think that's partly again because the Conservative Party isn't connected in any social, cultural way. It's not where young farmers go to meet wives now. It's not where successful small businessmen go to enter society. So neither party, it seems to me, has that, certainly for a generation, a cultural connection, and the historical cultural claims they make for themselves, the party of Disraeli, the party of Attlee, doesn't mean anything to anybody. And to me that's quite a significant, even though it's always been coming for a long time, I feel there's a significant break that maybe a lot of people in Labour and Conservatives haven't got yet.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah. I mean, I think it's also, I don't think it's only like negative. I don't think it's only about the loss of those institutions and identifications. It is also about people actually becoming more sophisticated in a lot of ways and getting more access to sort of information. I mean, what's happened in Wales is, that Labour hegemony lasted until very recently. And the current leadership of the Labour Party they wrecked the basis for it by wrecking, they came and interviewed and imposed a load of candidates and didn't allow Mark Drayford's succession to go forward. And I think, in the part, like decades ago, it would have taken people years to realise that was what was happening, if they realised it at all. And that's not what happened in Wales. People realised very quickly that was what was happening, and they reacted. They reacted very quickly on the basis of an entirely correct understanding of what was happening. So, I mean, and I think it's good that they did. It's good. Plaid had done. Everybody should have gone out. It was the only thing to do, to go out and vote for Plaid. So I think everything you're saying is true, but I think also I wouldn't want to see it only in terms of that narrative of like the long loss of the institutions. It's also about actually the acquisition, the fact that one of the good things about being in an information-rich media environment is people and social media is people aren't dependent upon those institutions for their sense of political belonging or political information anymore. So they are able to kind of adapt, and I think that's a big part of the picture, the situation that we're in actually, that they don't. That's a big part of why actually. I mean, a part of the big picture for where we are now is that the left surge that Corbynism represented the start of has turned out to be just much more resilient than the right thought or the establishment thought. They assumed that if they got back control of the Labour Party, then they would put it down for a generation, which is what would have happened in the period you're talking about. So all those things are true at the time. That doesn't mean we're in a fantastic situation, because as we keep saying, like the most likely outcome is still fascism. So, but I think all those things are true at the same time.
But what about? I'm not trying to defend a position or anything, but if we think about how people are socialised or educated into thinking about politics, and I mean not people who are very committed, like I guess everybody here would be, but just generally people thinking about who to vote for, what to do. If that's that's still kind of unmediated by any sort of context for slower engagement and connections to people's material conditions. If it's and yeah, there's lots of news media, but there's also lots of digital media is not a particularly great environment for people to be socialised into thinking about politics, particularly when that socialisation is into very kind of American digital tech dominated conceptions of race and nation and sex and gender that then cut across the very specific and concrete problems that the British economy faces. So I mean, it seems to me that that's not a. Yeah, it feels like you're more at ease with that than I am? Or is it just because I'm more online than you?
Well, partly, yeah. I think it's where we're online. You spend all your time looking at those right-wing YouTubers, so you
endlessly, and flat earthers.
I mean, it's partly because you're talking about Wales. I think in the end, I think Reform have done better in Wales than I would have liked. But overall, I think what's happening in Wales is good. I mean, it's good as a response to the actions of the Labour leadership and the government. So,
but couldn't you interpret it as in the absence of the Labour Conservative parties, people move to nationalism, which is great in Wales and is good in Scotland, but they're doing it in England, and it's not so good.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's true, and that's not good. But they're not really equivalent. I mean, we know they're not really equivalent, and I also think, I mean, clearly in Wales, Welsh nationalism is weak. Like, it's not a strong part of the culture. Only about 20% of people speak Welsh.
More and more all the time.
Well, the statistics vary on that because there's more 12-year-olds speak Welsh now.
Yeah, because more and more,
yeah.
Partly because of the Senedd
the schools,
but also because the Welsh language schools are becoming very popular with Cardiff.
But the overall stats are fairly static, I think. And so clearly, I think as in Scotland, I think people have chosen a kind of civic nationalist politics as a rational vehicle for the social democratic and socialist politics. So, but I think so. I'm not going to. I mean, I can't mourn for the Welsh Labour Party really. I don't. And also, historically, if you go back, sort of pre-devolution and the sort of Dreyfus era, then the Welsh Labour Party was notoriously corrupt. So, I think all the. I mean, again, as I'm always saying, I think all these things can be true at the same time, and I think it's certainly. I think it's certainly. I think, as we all know, is the lack of sort of enduring institutions and the lack of that kind of enduring connection between the past and the present, in terms of people's understanding of their politics and their sort of place in history is problematic.
Is that as far as you want to go? It's problematic. Well, it is if it becomes dominated by sort of online experiences of pure polarization, in which to be political is just to assert yourself against some imagined enemy, but whatever manifestation of that enemy you can find online, and be hostile to it. But I suppose that sort of brings us to the kind of to think about the extent to which does the kind of electoral outcome suggest, at least in the English case, that there's a kind of entrenched sort of anti-system disillusion that isn't quite sure where to go. It had somewhere to go in Wales, it had somewhere to go in Scotland. It's obviously going to Reform and it's going to the Greens, but can it go beyond, where does that go, I suppose, is the question. And can it, and that's linked then to this, this other part of what the election shows, which is this clear emergence of kind of block voting. That part of what's happening is, there isn't necessarily huge enthusiasm for reform amongst all its voters, probably not amongst many of them. Most of them, that maybe not everyone who votes Green is doing so out of a great, strong conviction, but more out of a kind of, let's give these guys a go, see if this can be kind of better. How's this going to kind of work out? Which is a different relationship people have to their vote, but also means that, and this is clear in the data, that people are more voting within, their votes are shifting around within this, some kind of left block, some kind of right block. And if that gets entrenched, I mean, again, that's at a higher level, that's the same problem as the fragmentation, that nothing or no one can ever actually establish sufficient consent or hegemony to address the problems.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we should clarify for people what this idea is. This is a thing. This is the psephologists, the people studying voting behaviour in the past sort of 3 years really have got very excited about this observation that people. And that there's very little switching. I mean, basically, it's because the British election studies for 19 and 24 found very little switching from Labour between Labour and Tory. Even 19, it was statistically significant in terms of shifting a lot of seats with very small numbers. And there was a lot of shifting. There was a lot of shifting from Labour to Green and Lib Dem, for example, in 2019, which did impact things. And in 24, in particular, there's very little. And so this is the observation. This is the idea that there are these two big. There's a progressive bloc and a conservative bloc. And really, people just move votes within that bloc. I mean, I don't understand how this is a new idea, because this is what was happening in the 80s as well. I mean, in the 80s, the whole problem was the progressive bloc was split between the Liberals, SDP, and Labour, and the Tories had the whole conservative bloc. And the numbers haven't really shifted even since then.
There were switches between Labour and Conservative.
Well, there were, yeah, but there weren't that many. And the split. I mean, the thing that really kept Thatcher in office was the SDP, really. So, and I think so. That's the idea. So it's not. I think it's not a new idea. And it is true. It's pretty consistent in Britain. There's 43 vote for the right. There's normally about sort of 35% of people will vote for a fairly clear left program, and then there's about sort of 17, 18, you know, for some kind of liberal centrist program. And that's pretty consistent, really. And so it doesn't. So I don't know why people think it's new, but I also think I'm not certain that thesis is going to survive these local election results, because a lot of those results I was looking at in the northern towns for reform can't be explained by that, because the Tories never had a big enough vote in those places to explain how much those votes have gone up. So
you think it's Labour switching to reform?
There's no.
They switched a while ago, several cycles ago, didn't they?
Sorry?
Isn't it voters who switched some cycles ago, so that Labour is losing votes to Greens but seeks to reform?
Well, I think in the places I was looking at, no, the Green vote was so small. Places like Wigan, like all those wards, the Green vote is small. It's gone up a bit, but it hasn't gone up in anything like enough.
But wouldn't that suggest that people are voting? That, you know, they're lending their vote to Labour to beat reform. So it is part of that kind of large blocks primarily voting to stop something else happening, rather than having any great desire to see.
Well, maybe, Labour, but I also think there must be Labour to reform vote switches. Statistically, there must be people who's going from Labour to reform.
This is where I would pull out my political science colleagues from behind the counter and curtain. They would say not so much, but I think it depends where you start from. They're not switching from 2024, but they maybe have switching.
Well, we don't know yet, because we haven't done the study. We haven't got the data on last week.
Oh, all right.
We haven't got the data on that.
He's not right.
Because the reform vote, because this is nothing. This is the point. The point about last week is, you know, the results were not like the previous reform, you know, surges. They were really, really dramatic in a lot of those places. There's this really, really dramatic.
Well, there's also people coming in who hadn't voted previously. That absolutely was happening. And that's part of what's happening in Yarmouth. Labour's bringing out people who were previous non-voters. There was very high turnout in a lot of the counties.
That's true.
All over. I think a lot of that is people animated to vote for reform who wouldn't have voted necessarily that way before. And maybe some coming out to vote anti-reform as well.
I mean, I don't. It's not like I want to believe it, because, you know, the progressive alliance strategy that we've always argued for is predicated on the assumption there is a majority progressive bloc out there, and you just have to organise it efficiently. So it's not like it's not like I've ever been a great believer in the left to right switcher. But I was really shocked. I mean, I was only looking at them to prepare for this thing, and the scale of the reform. The scale of the reform margins in all those places where they won loads of councils in the north, all those places like Wakefield and Dorton. I looked at them, Denton rather.
You're supposed to be the music guy, not the stats guy.
Well, you know, I'm always saying the quant guys aren't my enemies. It's the Rawlsians and it's the normative political theorists are my enemies. You know, so I think it's, yeah. So but we don't know, because they have to basically. I mean, we don't know for sure, because they have to go and do all the survey. They have to go and survey people and ask them if they actually change their votes, because you can never, as you just indicated, you can never tell from the raw data for sure. Like, to what extent it might be that just all the Labour voters didn't vote. It might. You can get the same results if all the people who voted Labour in the last election simply didn't vote. And a load of Tories voted for reform. So you can get exactly the same results, and that might be what happened as well. That might be what happened.
Well, I think the pre-poll data did suggest that. Well, we'll see. This is important, not just because I'm right and you're not, but because it affects things we'll talk about in the second half, which is strategies for going forward. How do you prevent reform winning national office? It does depend a lot on knowing, you know, is it about consolidating what there is of a progressive left bloc, and just worrying about that, was it winning people over? But we'll get to that kind of in a little bit, because I still want to talk about the because you're getting onto the geographical aspect, which you mentioned at the start. Why am I interviewing him? Why are you not asking
you
me
always
questions?
do this. I'm happy to ask you questions. This is what happens. I think
feel like
people think
I am not your straight man. I'm not.
I know. I think it's like I'm
I
your
tell him
little.
what to say
It's like
anyway.
I'm your little puppet.
I write the notes, by the way.
Yeah, but I'm just your little. I'm your little puppet. You just wind me up and watch me go, and you just sit there having a good time.
I didn't know you knew that. I didn't know you knew that. Wait till we get onto Bitcoin. So serious matters. Fascism on the rise. The geographical.
Partly thanks to Bitcoin. That's why it's important.
Yes, it is.
That's why dismissing it with your
casual,
your pseudo understanding of monetary theories. Not political.
No, that is not what I said. You know, it's not what I said.
I know.
Okay, before we turn to those two muppets in the arguing old guys, come back to this one last thing: the geographical variation, which you mentioned in terms of the city country and the kind of the north south, and the London kind of not London, because I think that does seem to be a clear kind of pattern, certainly cities and towns. But I don't know how does that complicate this picture? Is that a different kind of fragmentation to do with city and country and the kind of historic sort of English cultural imaginary of the city versus the country? Because it seems to me it certainly is at some level. I mean, all these. You'll all know the kind of phenomenon, these digital, the kind of online influencers who go wandering around London, all these super hard guys who are doing all their looks maxing, who are really, really scared to be in a city. Oh, it's going to kick off. There's a crowd. Yeah, it's a tube station. They can't get in. All that stuff. That seems to be kind of a real part of it in some cultural way, that the city is just a bad place and you can't go there. Rather than, and I don't know if we can understand that as just some kind of phantasmatic dimension, or actually rooted in some more meaningful material context, but is either urban, rural, or north-south, or east-west, because there's definitely a coastal story going down from Yarmouth through Lowestoft into Clacton, where Farage is down through Kent, that is partly about real economic change and the decline of fishing, but also about the kind of imaginary of being on the coast and being the most exposed to Europe and all the rest of it.
Well, I think you should talk a bit more about that, because I can talk about the places I can talk about are the big cities and the mill towns. But I think you should say a bit more. So it's not just you interviewing me. You should say a bit, because you're the one. You live in Norfolk and you've lived in Bath. You've lived in Belfast. You're the person that's lived in the places where everyone hasn't voted Labour since like the 1900s.
That's what it is. I go there.
I used to go.
Start doing talks. I think
it was
goes against it. Yeah.
It was the first world transformed in Liverpool. I said to some group of people, I haven't really met a Tory since 1989. So
that's all I mean.
So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in the coastal regions, what it is it's a combination of that. It is incredible economic decline, partly over a long and also over a short period. I mean, in places like Yarmouth, there is kind of money, but it's seasonal money that goes to the people who own the kind of arcades and the theatres, and there's tremendous, there is multi-generational long-term unemployment. But you see that also on kind of Lincolnshire coast as well, and you see that further down. That's a big part of it, is that decline. I think it's also though to do with who lives on the coast, because some of it is also people who've retired to the coast. So you've partly got people who would have been working in the mines, maybe in Nottinghamshire in the 1980s,
Scabs.
maybe even Durham, who've kind of moved further out, who've retired to kind of cease. So there's also an ageing dimension to it. There's that kind of demographic too, but I do think the kind of the left behind abandoned narrative is really quite powerful there, and it makes absolute sense. It seems really powerful for people there, and what they've got instead of anything like forward growth is the usual sort of heritage museum about what it was once like to work in the fishing industry, And I did some work with some kids there, and they were sort of quite shocked to hear that their city had once been economically important, and they were quite proud in a way. So it does have some kind of value, but it didn't seem to me where that goes for them. I don't know, because they're part of the resources that are going into Yarmouth, they're going in to pay people like me to go in and do talks to people, and that's not going to help anybody long term.
And are these places where Labour would once have been strong? Because that's growing up in the north, and having lived in London since then, I just think everywhere south of Chester, everyone's a Tory anyway. So why does it matter?
I'm not used to you asking me these questions.
No.
Well, Yarmouth has been Labour in a long time ago, and historically the agriculture unions were quite important in places like Suffolk. Hasn't been for a while, but they are important if they are going to be going towards the kind of Rupert Low and become breeding grounds for that kind of opposition. And
I mean, there's a time when the Seamen's Union was like a big union. That's where John Prescott came from, for example, and that had strength in those fishing towns, didn't it?
Yeah. But Suffolk is also one of the places that Greens took in 2024. So there's also a shift happening, which is partly people moving out from London. So part of it is retired media executives, but some of that is then people connecting with people with a sense of living in rural areas and what that needs and how to support and defend that. Some of it is weirdly kind of conflict over renewables, solar farms and pylons and stuff. People not wanting them, and Greens partly getting in off the back of opposing them. But so they become in different ways, even the smaller villages and the coasts, different expressions of this hostility to a politics that is seen as being for cities, that is about the kind of interests of the Norwich people, graduates, them, the people in London. So I think that is an important dynamic beyond kind of whether or not they did vote Labour. But maybe you want to say, there's no ground to be won back, but there's definitely ground to be kept away from others.
Yeah, sure.
Go on, say, yeah, I agree with all that.
Yeah, I agree, of course. Well, I don't know. I can only defer because I don't really know those places. I mean, I've
you don't go to the seaside?
No, I've been there. Yeah, I've been there, but I don't know.
It's going to have to be a live podcast where I take you around Yarmouth.
Yeah, I have been. Yeah.
Maybe we can go to Wetherspoons and see if we can meet Rupert Lowe.
But I think, I mean, obviously, I think the story. To come back to your sort of questions, the stories in the towns and the cities, I think, is fairly well known. It won't surprise people loads. I'm always really sort of encouraging people to focus on the importance of the mill towns in particular as the real engine of socialism and the Industrial Revolution, because the big cities like Manchester and Liverpool take all this credit, which Liverpool doesn't deserve at all. It was a Tory city till the 60s and a slave port. It was really the mill towns, which for me personally, growing up in Lancashire, it was really important because it meant, there was a kind of different, there was a set of cultural institutions and a kind of cultural memory, which meant that even there were plenty of Tories and there were plenty of idiots, like there were anywhere. But statistically, compared to a lot of places, there was more chance that somebody's nan would have been a weaver in a textile factory in a sector that had achieved equal pay for women before the end of the 19th century, and could remember them all coming out to see Gandhi when he came, and the solidarity of the Indian struggle, and had the memory of the solidarity even. There
are memories of that in Yarmouth, of kind of herring girls going on strike.
Sure.
They used to follow the kind of boats all the way down the coast, and there are a lot of Scottish.
Sure.
Settled there and became part of industrial disputes.
Sure.
Partly specifically feminist disputes.
And it does seem that all that stuff, really the last residues of that stuff of that kind of ideological orientation have been going, like just in the past few years. And they're partly going for obvious demographic reasons. So the jobs aren't there. So the young people aren't there, and the working age people aren't there. So the people who are still there are retired, and their material interests lie in their asset prices and their stock market linked pensions. So that shifted. But I think also, there's also increasing evidence among working age people, that exactly as you say, that a sense of a kind of what's been inherited actually is a kind of anti-systemic feeling. That there's a kind of anti-systemic feeling which is partly attached to a kind of century-long sense of this being a place which is sort of outside and is sort of in opposition to whatever kind of forms of elite power there are, and that is being channeled into support for reform amongst people who don't really have a strong sense of a kind of alternative.
Yeah, no, exactly, but it's complicated in the sense in that it's not just. Part of it is kind of suburban employed people resentful about other people getting their welfare money, but it's also in places like Yarmouth people kind of resentful at the welfare state that they're in part dependent on, because the relationship to it is one that is partly experienced as domination.
Yeah, for sure, that's definitely true. And I think, at the end of the day, it's the decline of the unions, which has really affected things in those places, and has affected things in like South and Central Wales, for example. I mean, the Wales just aren't there as institutions to provide the unions aren't there as institutions to provide a sort of ideological counterweight to right-wing propaganda on the internet. Basically, they're not, and without the unions being there as that counterweight, then that's very difficult. I mean, the other thing, you talked about the cities, and of course, the fact that living in a city is more likely to make is a more reliable predictor of somebody probably having sort of leftist politics. That's true for most of the past 150 years. It's not always true, but it's usually true. And I think we would take a whole other podcast actually to sort of look at the various theories and accounts of why that is. But I mean, what I would say one thing I think is why it is because living in the city, people are immediately conscious of the reality of inequality. I mean, one thing I remember Ellie May actually, when she was working at Class, our friend Ellie May O'Hagan, she was working at Class, they were doing all these focus groups with people about their ideas about equality and inequality and what kind of left-wing messaging might persuade people to support higher sort of marginal tax rates, etc. And I think I'm remembering right. I might be remembering something completely different that I read that has nothing to do with Ellie May, but I think I'm remembering right. She'll like getting mentioned anyway. And the point was that people really, like a lot of people in small to medium-sized towns don't really see any really rich people. Like they don't see them, around very much. Like they're living in a slightly different town somewhere else. They're not confronted with the kind of reality of inequality. Whereas you live in the city, even if you're a rich person, you're confronted with the reality of inequality on a kind of pretty daily basis. And there's pretty good evidence, I think, that itself does just shift people to the left. Like people can't stay on the right convincing themselves that they deserve their wealth and that all those poor people somewhere deserve to be poor when they're like actually physically walking past them in the street every day. So I think, and I think that is a problem. That's something I've heard. That's something I heard from a lot of people and people at Neon as well. Before that research was going on at Class about this, the extent to which they were finding a lot of those people in the towns who were being won over to this anti-welfare discourse really didn't understand like how rich people are, like and like how. And what it actually meant, because they don't really see it that much. So I think that's one element of why the cities, the culture of the cities is very different. But the culture of the cities being different is an old thing. I mean, it was, it goes back to the French Revolution. It goes back before that. The London apprentices were like the engine of the English Revolution.
It goes back to Rome.
It does go back to Rome.
Back to Athens. I'm going to stop you because we've looked. That's been kind of looking at what happened last week, but looking backwards, right? In terms of the decline of institutions, the changing ways people get politically socialised, these different kind of divisions. So we're going to have a little. We're going to stop there to have kind of some discussion about that, because people will agree, disagree, have other things to say, and then maybe do that for sort of 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then we'll go about the future, and then we can go back and you can tell us that he was all wrong.
Brill, do you want to open to questions?
Open to questions,
yeah.
Great.
Or just points. It's okay.
Yeah,
points, questions.
It's all content.
You're allowed comments.
It's all content as far as we're concerned.
You're allowed comments this time, yeah. This more of a comment or question is permitted, Jeremy said. Okay, right. Should we take them in batches, do you think? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's work. I'll work from the back down. So there's one hand there, and one hand there. Can someone hand this? Oh, actually, no. Can I get beside? I can. There we go.
Try and stick on the backwards looking bit and we'll do the future bit next.
Hi, yeah. You mentioned people filming the little city videos. It's quite popular outside of Whitechapel Tube Station. But I think that point really, like the entire theme of that is multiculturalism versus anti-multiculturalism. It's like the main theme, and I think people do vote on that.
Mm-hmm.
Down here.
Jeremy, you spoke a little bit about the complexities of class, and if you could say a bit more about how maybe that's affected the surprising lack of success by the Greens, or maybe the success of reform. It'd be interesting to hear that.
Thank you.
Was it someone down here? Oh, no. Okay, we'll go to the front first, then we'll come back. Wasn't you? No, it was here. Sorry, everyone.
A slightly technical one. Why did reform not win so many councils, even though they swept the board in terms of council seats? And I'm from Liverpool, and we didn't have any elections, but the outer boroughs did, and we lost quite a few Green councillors in those boroughs. So, like, why did our vote go
What do
down?
you think? What's your sense?
Not sure. I've got a meeting tomorrow in St Helens about it.
Okay. So you're going to crib Jeremy's answer. Yeah? Brilliant, thank you. I think you should start, because they were mostly for you.
I don't. I think they can be for both of us. Well, sure, yes, the voting against multiculturalism and against kind of cosmopolitanism, yeah, I completely agree with. I think, and I think there's a whole political question around the extent to which people feel that, I would say, cosmopolitanism as a broad cultural experience is something they have an investment in, or something that they feel is being imposed on them, and something that they associate with a kind of general process of disenfranchisement. So I just think your observation is correct. I think, and I think it's a huge political issue for us to deal with. And I think, I mean, the people making those videos are just kind of what I think they are, mostly just opportunistic, sort of racist, sort of rage baiters. So
I suppose, yeah, I mean, I think this touches on what we partly talked about in relation to kind of Scotland and Wales, that in Scotland and Wales there are forms of largely civic nationalism that people are able to sign up to, whereas the nationalism in England is clearly primarily an ethno-nationalism that partly manifests in those kinds of videos and voting against multiculturalism. But I think there's a question that for me is open. Maybe it shouldn't be. I don't know. Is what's the primary and what's the secondary, right? So is it that people are primarily racist, and that's why they kind of like the videos because it confirms their racism and sustains that must be part of it, or is it that that representation of, say, Whitechapel becomes a kind of signifier for some broader set of complaints? Anyway, you can't really separate them; they're all completely.
No, but I think we do have to separate them, and I think quite clearly it's different with different constituencies. So just as I think sort of anti-immigration sentiment is actually divided between people who genuinely, rightly or wrongly, believe that mass immigration has put too much downward pressure on their wages and access to assets and public resources, and people who are more motivated by the fact that they're quite racist. And I think I think obviously those things will get mixed up in different people, but I think we need to sort of differentiate. So I think the answer to the question is going to be different in different cases, and that's hugely important for us politically, because the people who are properly racist, like there's not so many of them that we need to worry about them. We can just oppose them. Whereas the people who, as you put it, for whom Whitechapel is a sort of metonym for the whole process, the whole set of social and economic processes which they feel has marginalised them. Well, those people we have to figure out how to win over some of them. We have to persuade them that it's the wrong metonym, and the right one is George Osborne.
That's where it partly works. It says this is it can be a way of attacking the kind of the cultural Marxist elite. That's you, by the way.
Yeah.
They did this. They wanted this to happen. There's that kind of element
That's
of it.
true.
I think,
Quite right. Very.
It's part, but there's also this is also part of a US-born discourse that is being fed in by the kind of Musk and Teal channels.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Partly with the purpose, I would say, to entrench a belief, not just racist beliefs, but to affirm natural inequality as a kind of fact around which politics must be built, and I think that's part of what's going on in those videos. So there's a whole set of political stakes involved.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. That's what's happening. I think they're really going to have a job convincing people about natural inequality, though, because as I've said before, I lived in Atlanta. That's even pretty virulent English racists. They don't really believe that the black people are descended from Noah's younger son, and therefore their subjugation was ordained by God. They're quite confused actually about why they're racists, like a lot of the time. And I think it doesn't. And I would say the hegemony of liberalism in English political culture is like historically, like it's a curse and a blessing. Like it's a curse. It makes it really difficult to mobilise support for democratic and collectivist projects, but it also makes it very difficult to convince people that there's actually like inequalities are correctly naturally ordained. So I think they will come up against a limit with that. But I think what we can expect to happen is the attempts to translate that American straightforward segregationist white supremacism into some English idiom, they will take some weird, disgusting shape of their own, and they probably are doing, but they won't. I don't think they'll be able to translate them. They'll never be able to translate them perfectly because it doesn't really work in English culture, I think.
Well, you're more optimistic than me on these things, aren't you? But
Well,
again, I'm too online, yeah.
I think there'll be fascism. It just won't look like American fascism. It'll just be its own a weird English thing. Yeah, it'll look like Nigel Farage. It'll look like Reform having, its second most senior politician being an Asian guy.
Yeah.
That is what it's obvious. That's what English fascism is going to look like. It is going to look like if and when it happens, because we've already, the thought of the Republicans having as many people of colour in the absolutely top positions is unthinkable. Compared to the British Conservative Party. So it doesn't mean it won't be fascism. It will just be some weird, not properly racist fascism. They'll find some way to make it even worse.
Class
and the Greens. I mean, to really clarify, I think the Greens' success wasn't. Greens didn't do badly, or they didn't do surprisingly badly, except compared to my wildly over-optimistic expectations based on just living in Walthamstow, and it sort of it turned out. Well, Joe said, my partner said, it turns out we're living in even more of a left-wing bubble than we thought. That's like we mean, and because it was just like everybody was just going to vote Green. They weren't even getting excited about it. So I don't think. To be clear, actually, I meant to say before, what wasn't surprising in many ways about the whole outcome was the YouGov polls have been completely accurate. The YouGov polling for months has been borne out. And one reason I've been fairly chipper is because I was getting really worried about the poll from those weird outfits that kept saying that between them, Tory and Reform were going to get 53 or something. So that's turned out to be wrong. And the YouGov claim that no, the right-wing bloc indeed isn't really going over 43, like it never does, has been accurate. So I think in that sense, the Greens haven't done particularly badly. I think the Greens have really done really well. I think the whole question of how we should feel about the Green outcome is really complicated, because I think we should be really happy. It's been a fantastically successful strategy. It's absolutely they've destroyed the Labour right. I think we'll get to the leadership stuff afterwards, but they've destroyed them. They're finished now. Now it's finished. I said they were going to come back. Like I said 5 years ago, they're not done yet. I said Corbynism probably wasn't going to be able to really defeat them, but now they're finished. They're absolutely finished, and they've been finished. They're finished because of Peter Mandelson and Zach Polanski, and mainly because of Zach. So they're finished. So that's a huge success. I mean, them losing Walthamstow is devastating. It's absolutely devastating to them because I'm not joking. So many of those people fucking live where I live. I should know. So many of them live there. Sorry. Oh, is he? I haven't seen him. I'll have to.
He doesn't go to your dance.
I'll have a word with him. I'd like to. I'll look out for him. Thank you, because he is one of the people I fantasised about having conversations with recently. So it's really devastating for them, and that's why it's good that despite doing a fairly competent job on the council, to be fair, they're all gone, because that's what you get for attaching yourself to that factional project. So, but in terms of the question of class, I mean, I think clearly, I mean, we don't have time to spend, we could be here for 2 hours trying to talk about the extremely complex nature of class and the way it's lived in a complex society. I would say that, class, I mean, I would say people often want to sort of pin down, say, and to pin the concept of class down and say, no, what class means is your position in the relations of production, or what class means is your position in a status-oriented, an occupation structure with differential status rewards, or what class means is, whether you like chips or not. And it means all of those things at the same time, and usually when people are using the word class, they're just talking about slightly different things in those different contexts. And the whole complex of things that we talk about when we talk about class are all real, and they all interact with each other in very complicated ways. But I think broadly speaking, I would say that one of the ways in which people have experienced different kinds of inequality that has really impacted on whether they voted for Reform or Green, whether they're in the towns or the coastal towns or the mill towns, or whether they're in the big cities, it does have to do with to what extent. I mean, really, it has to do with to what extent they see themselves as having a possible stake or a likely stake in a radical reforming project, or compared to whether they see themselves as having some kind of stake in what's fundamentally a defensive project. So reform, I think, like the right always is, it's fundamentally a defensive project. Although it is vaguely claiming to people that it's going to, initiate some massive systemic change. But the complete vagueness about it, and the fact that it does all get bound up with these symbols of nationalism, leads me to say I think fundamentally it's sort of defensive. It's it's operating at an imaginative horizon where it's all that people can imagine happening is just things not just keeping getting worse and worse and worse. Whereas people who are voting Green are people who can imagine that actually things could get better. And I think if you're someone who was the first or second in your generation to go to university, or you're somebody who identifies as queer, or is just a straight person who likes living in an egalitarian sexual relationships, or if you're somebody who has got the kind of education or the interests to enjoy living in a cosmopolitan culture, if you're somebody who, for various reasons, which are all about access to various kinds of resources and assets, is able to see something positive in the changes that have occurred over the past 30 years, then you can imagine that positive things, even on other scales, in other domains, could happen in the future. But if you're someone whose whole experience of the past 30 to 50 years has really just been things getting worse, then it's very hard to imagine things getting better, in which case you're not likely to be able to orient yourself to that project. And so I think those are experiences of class, I think, to the extent that the experience of class is really mediated through a whole set of really sort of access to different kinds of resources. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we might pick up some of that, because I think part of the kind of, maybe I'm reading into the question, was partly about how does that affect kind of future strategies, because because the flip side of that is how do you bring those together? I mean, this is back, and I keep bringing it back to where I live, but this is it's the Yarmouth-Norwich question, right? Because Norwich is absolutely that place. Do you remember that show Portlandia about life in Portland?
My sister was in it.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Got a bit part in it. One scene, Lucy.
Because it starts with this song about the dream of the '90s as alive in Portland.
Yes.
Where you can.
I did a whole talk about that at a conference in the States once. Yeah, the dream of the '90s being alive.
Norwich is the Portland of the UK, because it's jugglers and circuses and people converting churches into art galleries and getting endless tattoos, and
all the hot girls wear
glasses. So people are benefiting from all that openness and some of the kind of economic shift, although some of the graduates are obviously suffering. But then Yarmouth is getting none of that, other than people coming from Norwich to go and do work on them, run workshops and stuff like that, which is, again, anyway, because that's me as well. But so, I think it really, start kind of version of that sort of division. But just before we kind of move on, though, you haven't explained Liverpool.
Well, I think
Can you do that in
Liverpool's tied up with that questionnaire had a factual question which we can answer very simply, which is only in a lot of those places only a third of the seats were up for election. Places like Wigan. That's why Reform haven't captured up the council. I mean, it's quite. I mean, and it's one of the things that's really creating panic in the Labour Party is the realisation that there'll be another tranche of council seats in the same places up for election next year, and in all those places, if something doesn't change dramatically, Reform will take the council. So we're very likely next year to see a massive swathe of councils going Reform. I don't know. Out of Liverpool, I don't really know. I'm not there, so I don't know why. I don't know why Out of Liverpool has lost a load of Green councillors. And I'd be interested to hear anybody who does know. I wonder to what extent it has to do with the fact that the only stuff I know that's been going on in the bits of those places where I know anything's been going on is there have been pockets in which, like, your party or now former your party activity has been relatively high. So there may well be places where a left vote that went to the Greens at the last council elections has been split. So that might have happened. But I think lots of people are pessimistic that Liverpool is going to get. Liverpool might not be immune to the Reform wave, and I think it might not be. Did
you read that article about the cosmic scallies?
I did. I talked to Johnny about it.
Which quoted me and not you.
It did, yeah. I was very happy for you to see that. Of course, it was me who hundreds of people directed towards the article for comment immediately. So,
well, they didn't need to ask me.
No, it was very good. No, I chatted a bit to Johnny about it. I mean, I don't always agree with him, Johnny Ball. He's a self-described Blue Labour scouser. But the point I made actually to him.
You should explain what the cosmic scally is.
Okay, yeah. So, a cosmic scally is a scouser, is a scouse guy who's into like gym culture and some bits of New Age and conspiracy. Like maybe into drugs, not very political. If they have any politics, it'll be very incoherent and easily shifted towards Reform.
And it's an interesting little trend. I retweeted some footage of a guy from Doncaster Reform, new Reform councillor of Doncaster, very concerned about UFOs over Doncaster Airport.
Yeah, well, I mean, my response, I said to Johnny, I think, well, it's not new because in the late 80s there were loads of cosmic scowls in Liverpool. Like that was the world I lived in because all my
Were you a cosmic scowl?
Well, I wasn't a cosmic scowl, but I needed to go see them to get my ounces of hash to go and. So I had to spend a lot of time in the world of the cosmic scowl. And
an ounce at that age.
Yeah.
How did you get the money?
Well, we're not talking about that.
Up.
So don't.
No,
but
it wasn't Bitcoin, was it?
So the cosmic cosmic scowls were a thing even then. I mean, I've had big discussions about it actually over the past week with various people, and I said in the end that the ones in the late 80s would be better described as psychedelic scowls because they weren't really into New Age at all at that point. They weren't even really into gym culture. They would start to get into things like kickboxing in the 90s. But they were into like eating. They were often into taking like heroic doses of cheap blotter acid, like huge amounts of the cheap blotter acid that went around all the council estates. And their politics was really, and even then they were really apolitical. And if they had any politics, they were. The thing I was explaining to Matt Huxley actually was a thing at the time. Obviously, people in Liverpool are always jealous of Manchester, but this particularly the whole Manchester Happy Mondays thing. People were really resentful because the feeling in Liverpool was the Mondays had just nicked this shtick, which was more associated with Scousers than with Manx, because cosmic scowls were such a thing. I mean, the cosmic scowls evolved out of the trend within Liverpool Football Club on the Cop. There was a whole contingent of people who go to the Cop and would smoke loads of spliffs and listen to Pink Floyd on their Walkmans while the match was on. That was a thing. David Toop wrote about it, I think, in The Face once in the mid-'80s. So the cosmic scowls were really a thing, but And I was really conscious that the Cosmic Scouts didn't have very good product. A lot of them were like Sean Ryder. They were like, I'm a child of Thatcher. I'm an entrepreneur, me. And they rejected like the working men's culture, the pub culture of their dads. So they were absolutely amenable to a kind of right-wing politics. And at the time, when I moved down to London in the early 90s, like a lot of people, I thought Liverpool as a radical city was already over, because that was such a thing. And I think, Liverpool's retention of its identity as a radical city obviously has a great deal to do with Hillsborough and the real ban on the Murdoch press across the city. So it was a city where people did not read The Sun for like 15, 20 years, during which The Sun was still really powerful in the country, and they read the Mirror instead. So its identity as a radical city partly survived because of that.
It's a great natural experiment. There's really good data on, that just shows the absence of the sun, how that affects people's political knowledge and understanding.
Yeah, but but again, it's always. I mean, it's something which people will study, and even people from the city will say. Liverpool's radicalism was always had fairly shallow roots. It was like in the same way that Scotland, most Scottish MPs were Tory in the 50s. Most Liverpool MPs were Tory until the early 60s. And it was the collapse of the shipping industry, obviously the very rapid collapse of the shipping industry, which really radicalised people. Really radicalised that really kind of radicalised people. It was that plus, it has to be said actually about Liverpool. I always feel the need to say this, it's true, because it's not my political tradition, but it's important to acknowledge it. It was the one place in Britain where there was a genuine, organic, working class Trotskyist tradition from the 40s. And that did actually, those people they genuinely did create a kind of vanguard for working class people in Liverpool that radicalised a whole sort of two generations in the city. But of course, that's been kind of in abeyance and gone. And I mean, that's another thing to say. Actually, it's partly Hillsborough, and it partly is the legitimately successful work. The one place in the country, really, you can say Trotsky. There was an organic industrial Trotskyist tradition from the 40s, and they did succeed in kind of hegemonizing the culture for a couple of decades. But with all that having died down, then there is every danger of Liverpool, of parts of Liverpool falling to reform. I mean, Liverpool's not going to become a reform city. They're not going to win the city council. But the fact that those outer London, those outer Liverpool boroughs, where I did know a lot of Cosmic Scouts. Back in I did score a lot of hash in places like Kirby.
It is an important thing to get one's head around, that a part of the reform support, as well as the racists, and maybe these are racist too, is this kind of sense of that it's countercultural.
No, it is. Yeah, it is.
System. But we should. Did you get all that? It's going to help with your meeting tomorrow. Yeah?
Well, no, I think it's true. I think you're right. You're right about the counterculturalism, I suspect that part of what's happening, partly what will happen in some places, is there will be some places where Zach Polanski's been on T every single day for the past for the past 9 months, and he doesn't seem very countercultural now, and so the Greens won't seem as attractive to those people. I mean, I was talking to a friend who's a long time sort of green activist and sort of strategist just a few days ago, and I think there is a risk with how ubiquitous Zach has become in the media over the past few months, that within another 6 months, like a lot of people are just going to be tired of him, and he's just another guy in London who's talking about stuff.
So we'll get on to that, because I'm going to move us on. We will come back for more questions in a bit. Thank you for those questions, because we'll come back. We'll talk a bit about the future, including that. So, but before we get to kind of fate of Polanski and the fate of Farage, I do think we have to stop and talk about the union, because I think that's one of the big things that's happening here, in a way bigger than the English councils, is that we now have 3 pro-independence leaders in 3 of the 4 parts of the UK, and the unionist position, which used to belong to the Conservative Party, is now in Scotland and in Wales. The unionist vote is going to a party that is English ethno-nationalist. So that sets up a whole lot of different tensions, it seems to me, in Scotland and in between Scotland and England and Wales and England and so forth. So I think that's going to. I mean, that is going to be one of the big developments, isn't it? I mean, it's going to affect how Plaid position themselves, how Scotland position themselves, because I think Plaid will be able to pursue a a limited policy path and partly maintain a support base by saying, well, we're blocked from doing this by Labour, and that will intensify independence support and again build in more tensions and fragmentations in the UK polity. Scotland obviously is going to do the same thing. I don't know if they will go for referendum again or not. So I just don't see how that. I can't get my head around how that plays out. Where, you know, because I don't quite understand reform in Wales or reform in Scotland. My sense is reform is kind of weirdly decentralised, and they kind of do their own thing. But they're surely going to be held back to some extent as the unionist parties because of this reform, because of reform's nationalist orientations. But is this going to be? Are we going to look back in 10 years and say, oh, that was the point when part of that fragmentation was also the fragmentation of the UK? Because it becomes in reform's interest in part to kind of push that tension.
Yeah, I think that all depends what happens at the next election. I think if I mean,
that's going to depend in part on what the Senedd and what the Scottish Parliament do.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's true. So I don't know what will happen there in the next couple of years. But I think, I mean, ultimately, we know most people in Scotland and a vast majority of people in Wales would rather not have the hassle of like creating a whole different country if they could finally get a progressive government as well as substantial devolution. It's just a massive hassle. So so understandably they'd rather not. But I think there's no. I mean, I don't think the union with Scotland can tolerate Nigel Farage becoming prime minister. I'll say that. I mean, that is. Glasgow will just go into open. There'll just be a general strike in Glasgow, and they'll go into open revolt. I mean, and there'll be a referendum, and there'll be independence. I think if Farage.
That will also, that tension will also make it hard for Labour to come back. The Liberal Party was huge and dominant in Wales at the start of the 20th century, and I strongly feel that Labour is now going to be obliterated for a long time unless Plaid really, really cock up. But that also squeezes out the room for Greens, say, to take over, and going Greens' situation in Scotland is a bit shaky.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think Greens don't have that much room in Scotland or Wales, and they'll make some inroads, but that space is occupied by those nationalist parties. I think the Reform Welsh vote is strange, and I think it may be vulnerable to a popular Labour leader. Like if you had somebody like Burnham leader, there's a certain kind of working class, strongly working class identified Welsh voter who doesn't speak Welsh and doesn't like Plaid, and is pissed off with Labour now. They might well sort of go back to Labour, but I don't know. I think it's really the phenomenon of the Welsh Reform voter is quite opaque to us at the moment, I think.
Yeah, it's partly an anti-nationalist, kind of Welsh. There's an old argument there are sort of three different Waleses, a sort of English-oriented border, a kind of southern union, and then a kind of more Welsh speaking. I don't think that holds anymore at the present time, but it partly shapes some of those reform voters. Some of it is anti-immigration. But I'm also thinking there might be something in here to think about in terms of the Greens, since we're going to get to them in a minute. And you might think from afar, you would say, well, if the Greens are surging in these cities for the reasons that you've outlined, why they're not surging in Cardiff. So the fact they're not maybe tells us something about the Greens, right?
Yeah.
Because if the same demographic that is voting Green in Norwich or London or Bristol is actually not doing so in Cardiff because it's got Plaid, it seems to me that tells us that the Green vote is shaped by dynamics beyond that simple demographic, right?
Well, to an extent, yeah, but I just think, I mean, I would come back to what I was saying earlier about why I'm quite positive about the Plaid vote, because I think you're basically looking at the most the most politically engaged and intelligent, sophisticated 18% of the whole electorate nationally, and those people have made the entirely rational and correct decision that in Cardiff you should vote for Plaid. That Greens weren't going to take the Senedd, but Plaid could. And the same with the SNP in Scotland. So it's a sort of tactical lending a vote rather than indication that Greens. I'd say it's strategic more than tactical
because of the option for Plaid.
Yeah, I'd say it's strategic more than tactical. But I think that this electorate, the electorate that's voted Green in the English cities and Wales and Plaid Cymru in Wales and SNP in Scotland, it is making very clear to the kind of political class and the rest of the country that it will simply vote for whichever party has a clearly defined left programme that seems to have a chance of winning something. That's who they'll vote for. And So they're not really ideologically invested. I think you're right. They're not that ideologically invested in being green, but they'll also be very difficult to win back now. They'll be. I don't think that means I think they'll be very difficult for Labour to win back, because why would they? Like, why would you switch to it? I mean, one thing I think will happen, actually, again, I know this is coming back to the future, and this is speaking to what I was talking about earlier. I mean, partly the reason I started going and looking at all those ward results in places like Wigan, actually, because I've been talking to people, and we've been talking about the question of, will we see a lot of people who voted Green as a kind of experiment and then ended up with a Reform councillor or something? Will a lot of them go back to Labour? I think a lot of them will. But based on the results, it won't be enough to stop Reform anyway. But I'm sure that will happen in a lot of places. But so I'm sure there will be a lot of places where people voted Green this one time and it didn't work out. They didn't get a Green rep, and those votes will go down. But in the places where Greens have won, or you're very near somewhere where Greens have won, well, why would you go back to Labour? There's just no point. I mean, Green, as long as this tendency are in charge of the Green Party, they're just gonna deliver a programme to the left of whatever Labour will deliver.
So the implication there is that the Greens are clearly a permanent presence now, which I think is right. I don't think it's going to go down again. But I think we're still with the kind of line we had earlier, that they are limited geographically in part. But this isn't all kind of set in stone. It's going to depend on how the Green parties function and behave from now on. So part of the reason why I kept picking up on Plaid was that I think Plaid has this place that is deeper than just the kind of tactical voting, although that is part of it, is deeper than just a vote, because it's not equivalent to Labour's kind of deep embeddedness once upon a time in Wales, but because of the language, because of the cultural dimension, and the other ways in which it feeds in and out of people's daily lives, it's got resources to draw on beyond a short 6-week campaign, which is exactly what Labour doesn't have, and the Tories don't have. Now, so our Greens is part of Green strategy going forward, not just to position itself in relation to Labour and position itself in relation to demographics it wants to win votes for, but to find a way to kind of build a longer term and embedded presence in people's lives and experience culturally. I think it is.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So okay. So how does it do that?
I don't know. How do you think?
You know that I'm puppeting you. You're not puppeting me. Well, I don't know, but I think it is. I mean, I can't, partly I'm sort of priming things for questions because I want to hear what people's experiences was. But I mean, in Lewisham, where the Greens, I forget the numbers, but what was it? Went from sort of 3 councillors to 50 councillors or something, and won the mayoralty. And I'm sure that's got a lot to do with the winning mayor's interest and capacity around kind of digital media and cultural dimension and building those kind of connections, but also because of the way in which the Green Party has become connected to communities in part by Gaza protests. So it's become to stand for more than just a party of government. It expresses these broader orientations and positions. And I think part of Polanski's success, which is sort of by design and sort of by accident, is the way in which he kind of can embody a certain he sort of embodies if I say the thwarted graduate, I don't mean it in a bad way, but that's who he is, right? Studies acting at Aberystwyth. What are his prospects, right? How does that person live these days? Yeah, and he represents that, qualified, engaged, interested person, but kind of stuck in a certain way trying to work.
I'm sure nobody here knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, I've heard you've got lots of them in the cities. So I think it's that dimension which interests me beyond the kind of simple. I mean, obviously they've got to run the council well and do things. That's clearly part of it. But because the party is so new and the membership is so new, I suppose my worry is that people would become quite quickly party animals. In the sense of, we're for this party, and we hate the other parties. The usual thing that happens is we'll get too caught up in parties and lose that sense of where do we belong in a larger ecosystem, and how do we find a place that embeds us in that ecosystem and allows us to grow, and also grow, and as we grow, change to fit and adapt and be part of that larger ecosystem. Because I think there's a moment of danger where that gets lost as everyone gets too excited and too enthused. We're going to do everything now and it's going to be wonderful. And then it isn't, and everyone loses energy, and that sense of a longer term, actually 5, 10, 15, 20 years, how do we make ourselves build up to something that is an alternative in all these thick, round, variable kind of ways?
Well, the first answer would be just that I don't. I mean, obviously that's a danger, but there's always dangers. So, and I guess I realise that the kinds of people I know in the Green Party aren't all representative, but the people around Greens organised, the people that made Zach happen are mainly, they're very strategic. They're very conscious of all this stuff. They know better than to be really tribal as well. I mean, there is a whole contingent out there who are like, still furious at the Labour Party for still existing after it treated them badly. But they're not really the people driving the ZAC project, actually, and as far as I know. So I'm not worried that people are not aware of all those issues. But I also think we can't it shouldn't just be the responsibility of a party to do that. I think we need other forms of organisation. I think out in the communities and nationally and online even, like that aren't just party focused. Actually, I think we need some other sort of, I think we need some sort of. I certainly think we need some sort of broad socialist organisation that is not trying to be a party. Is not dreaming of being a party. That is going to do all kinds of things which are much harder to do if you're thinking, well, next year we'll become a party. Exactly what it's going to look like, I don't know, or if it'll happen, I don't know. But I think that's part of the answer to the question is, those of us who aren't currently members of the Green Party shouldn't regard the questions you asked as just their problem, basically.
I agree with all that.
Good.
But that's sort of gets me into asking you more broadly about the reform threat, because that seems to me that is number one. The primary goal is making sure reform doesn't win, and as you said at the start, that sort of looks like that's still quite likely, and so that's partly about how people organise themselves and position themselves in relation to tactical votes and where they are. But it is also responding to the kinds of things that have come up already, the cosmic scallies, the countercultural appeal that reform has, the ways in which people are looking for orientation in these cities that have fallen apart, towns that have fallen apart on the East Coast. I suppose one question is the strategy to try and win some of those people back, or just be like, no, we just need to make sure this 52% progressive bloc is absolutely well organised and knows what it's doing, understands that there's nothing more important, which push back on the kind of the accelerationists who want reform to win. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of running aground because I can't see ahead.
Well, I think it has to be both. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I suppose I do think that we have to take really seriously the need to organise with the coalition within the existing sort of progressive and liberal bloc. We do have to take that really seriously. And I was going to say, for me, the bigger danger, actually, the danger of the present situation, especially in places like East London, is our kind of exuberant enthusiasm about what the Greens are doing here will distract us, as it distracted me, from what's actually happening in Wigan, which we really have to worry about. And it's not clear that this thing that's happening here can be an answer to that. So, and then we have to think strategically about what that means. But we know what the answer to that is in really superficial terms. The answer to that, you have to have some sort of a coalition, and ideally, if it was down to us two, it would mean the leaders of all the parties, of SNP, Plaid, Green, Labour, Lib Dems, thrashing out some actual arrangement, like to make sure that they maximise the efficiency of their vote and got a sort of got a non-reform majority. We all know that's extremely unlikely. Second to that, certainly there will definitely be people with like websites and projects trying to recommend people how to vote tactically. Obviously, we need to pay as much attention to that as possible and try to make sure that people are getting accurate information. But I think those are sort of ideals that we have to kind of orient ourselves towards. But I don't think there's really a sort of magic solution.
But say so. Like one thing before we go to questions. So it always surprises me how much you end up in these conversations going down the kind of voting strategy party route. And I'm the poll prof, and I'm supposed to do that, but I'm more on the kind of cultural side. But I think you could, what's reform strategy going to be, right? So we know partly what's going to be because Zia Yusuf did that post about if you vote Green, we'll put asylum accommodation centres in your constituencies. If you don't, you won't. They're going to push that division for everything it's worth, and they're going to wait for something terrible to happen, and something terrible will happen somewhere, as it did in Southport shortly after Labour got elected, and they will exploit that to the fullest, and they will exploit the violent response that comes from that, and they will wait for the government, maybe for progressives, to kind of take a punitive response, and they will go to town on that as well. So we know that's going to happen. And I suppose my question, and part of what I'm thinking is are we prepared for that? And what will we do when that happens? Is there nothing we can do to prepare for when that happens? And is the strategy to find some way to sort of direct those resentments energy somewhere else, or to be absolutely militant, as it were, in saying, no?
I think it's going to depend on the instance. I think there's only so much you can prepare for in terms of that situation. I mean, obviously, we do want to direct people's resentments towards the common class enemy, like always. We always want to do that. I mean, I think it's useful to think about, well, what's the real sort of institutional and cultural challenge to the kind of outcome, I was saying would be desirable. I mean, I think probably, realistically, the biggest obstacle is going to be the fact that it's going to be very difficult for any Labour leadership to accept, after such a short time, that they just have to accept that all these losses to the Greens are irreversible. It's going to be very difficult, might well be impossible for them to accept that, because that would be the ideal. I mean, from my point of view, the ideal would be to have, Burnham or someone lead the Labour Party and say, it's fine if Labour only gets 30% of the vote now, if the Greens get 18%, because between us, that's like nearly 50% for the most radical, aggregate programme there's ever been 48% of the vote for. I would love that to be the case. That's almost impossible. Like it's really unrealistic to expect a Labour Party that's been the dominant electoral force on the left for 100 years now to accept that position within a couple of years. But we can try to encourage it. Part of what we can do is try to encourage that, really, and try to encourage a perspective like within the parties, which is really committed to some notion of a socialist project or a progressive project, which is not the project of one party, and try to encourage a fair. And I think that is cultural. I mean, that isn't just. It isn't just about numbers. It's about people. It is about getting people to be realistic about numbers, but it is also about creating a kind of culture of kind of shared, a sense of shared projects and shared interest, and as well as sort of shared values, to use that hated word. It's about that as well. It's about it's about cultivating that sense. And I think we can contribute to that. I mean, I would say that I think that the whole sort of electoral left, which sort of came out of nowhere after 30, 40 years in 2015, has been and is still going through like a really intense learning process. This is partly why. I mean, I think the exit from the Labour Party was unnecessary and probably set us back by a couple of years, but it's not a big deal. Because I think the defeat of Corbynism, given that the process had only been going on for 3 or 4 years at that point, was inevitable. I think it's inevitable that we're going to meet challenges. It may be inevitable that we have to go through a period of reform government. I hope it's not. But like we've said before, I think it's very likely we'll get a reform government that will collapse after 2 years. I think that's very likely. I think it's very likely that really you only get a Labour Party that's able to play a meaningful role in coalition with the Greens once the PLP has been decimated at the next election. And so I think all that's very plausible. And I think we've come quite a long way. And I think the extent to which people now are much more sophisticated about all these things that we were always talking about, the need to be strategic, the need to be collaborative and collegial, and the need not to be over-invested in an organisational identity. I mean, the level of sort of sophistication, I think, that's normal among kind of activists now is much better than it was 10 years ago. So I don't think it's impossible to cultivate it.
Let's find out what everyone else thinks.
Okay.
So questions more more probably answers.
Shall I do a bigger round
Yes,
first
please.
step? So yeah, let's try and take as many as you can. I will start at the back up here. Yes, we'll start with Simon.
Thank you. So yeah, on your comment, the question about your comments on how people have experienced the last 30 years and how their imagination of the future determines their voting. But supposedly the received wisdom is that it's the older people who've benefited from asset price inflation in the last 30 years, or the tradespeople who are voting reform, and they probably have gained more or going to gain more than economically anyway than the lanyard class, as they're called. And 10 years ago, everyone used to talk about elite overproduction and the graduate without a future, and that seems like much more of a thing now with the economy and the job market and AI and all of that. So it makes it hard to see that is going to hold, or it undermines the idea that people are resentful because of their economics situation, potentially.
Thank you.
If people put their hands up nice and tall, I'll make sure we get round basically everyone, I think.
Jeremy, everything you said points to a politics of alliances, but surely the corollary of all of this has to be proportional representation. You just can't make any sense. You can't make any sense of a system where there's now 5 or 7 political parties. So A, it's fair, but B, it's a very coherent way of keeping the right wing out of power.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hello. I'm slightly going to out myself, but as a newly elected Green councillor in Hackney, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. What's your advice to the Green councils that have a majority Green group in terms of contributing to the wider progressive movement that you've just spoke about? But generally, what's your advice?
Brilliant question. Thank you.
This way. Great. Go. I'm going to go to some more women over there.
Hi. I'm a migrant. I arrived 9 years ago, and everyone was super excited about Labour being elected. In this time, apart from Corbynism, Labour has not been what the people seem to believe it was. I've never witnessed that. So Labour being elected for me was more of a protest vote than a true landslide. I believe a lot of the elections of reform people are also that. People are desperate. And the denial of that desperation from Labour and how they've been acting is appalling. And people can't support that. In our area, in Walthamstow, a lot of the councillors were doing quite a good job, but they could not be elected with a government behaving this way. So I think there's a lot of work to do in terms of reassuring people that there is a vision for a better future, that we can build a better life for themselves. And yeah, Greens have a lot of work to do, but I think also generally the parties are making themselves obsolete. People do not believe in ideology because none of them behave and are aligned with the ideology.
Thank you.
Go on. Should we do one more?
Do them all.
Do them all. Okay, we'll do them all.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy's disagreeing with me. I'm thinking of time. One more then.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I'm a regular listener on the podcast. One issue that you haven't discussed is how right-wing the Tories are now. And, I mean, what's your thoughts on the possibility of a Tory reform pact at the next election and a Tory reform coalition government which would last longer than the 2 years Jeremy's talking about?
Thank you. So you're going to have to constrain yourself so we get round to other people.
Yeah.
So I want your answers to be short. And I want you to let me answer some of them.
Well, you can go first if you want.
Oh, hoist by my own petard. I'm in favour of PR.
It's PR. We've been arguing for forever. You know, I got up and lots of people have heard this story before. That was in my first year at university. I was a delegate to Labour Students' Conference. I said, if we don't implement PR and accept that we will never get over 50% of the vote, so that must mean necessarily some kind of coalition with the Liberals. If we don't accept that as the only strategic response to our electoral situation, the only alternative will be, and this is 1991, I said, if we don't do that, what will happen instead? No, it's 1992. What will happen instead is the party will move so far to the right, it will be unrecognisable to most of the people in this room. And my motion was voted down by the Scottish Labour Party delegation, who assured us that their view was that even though PR was a good idea, they were sure that a Labour Party would soon get over 50% of the vote, and so you wouldn't need a progressive alliance to do PR. You know, we've been arguing for PR forever. Of course, it's necessary. You cannot get a progressive government under first past the post. This doesn't happen. And the only way you get a progressive government under first past the post is to have World War II happening.
So, nice and clear. I want to try and bundle three questions up and give them more proper kind of answers, because it strikes me this really interesting question: how would you advise the kind of Green councillors? Sort of speaks to these questions. The first one, although you asked lots of things about the changing economic kind of context, you partly talked about imagining the future, so we can touch on that. And then the person over here talked about Labour sort of not standing for anything, right? So part of the answer about what Greens have to do is to kind of it is absolutely about embodying something beyond themselves as a party that people can identify with, which clearly is what is happening, and that's what the enthusiasm is, and converting that into a continued practice in councils. I mean, in some sense, I shouldn't really be answering this question because I don't know I've not worked in councils, but because the tensions that will arise between trying to run that kind of administration and bureaucracy and deal with what that puts to you will put you in positions where you can't always do the thing you want to do, right? So the difficulty is going to be how you bridge that and where you break maybe some of the things you want to do, but try and do that in ways that keeps people on board so they can see what it is that's happening. So I think it's partly about being transparent and trying to lead people while managing these different kind of trade-offs, while maintaining very clearly, strongly to that sense of is that word values you don't like, but I mean the fact that you believe in something that people can identify with, and being prepared to push that and sometimes put that ahead of the other kinds of things. But that links to this broader question about how we imagine kind of futures, because I think that is what's going on. The phrase I use a lot is that people suffer from the occlusion of the future. Whether that's, I think it is sometimes kind of older pensioners or retired people in Yarmouth who haven't got lots of assets, or young people, or me. I don't know if I'm going to have a job in 2-3 years' time working in the university sector. So we're all kind of stuck and permanently caught up in a sense of can't plan, can't work out where to go, what to do, feeling shell-shocked by it all. And anything that opens up that sense of possibility, which, as you said earlier very eloquently, is part of what brings people into the Greens, because and people who can imagine that broader future. So I think finding ways in which councils can do things that people can immediately feel and immediately sense and immediately recognise that something different is happening now. And that's going to be a hard job. I don't envy you at all, because it's going to be a lot of work to be present, making things be visible and making things be seen. But I certainly think you're going to be able to do that far better than the people that you beat.
So one of my plans for the podcast this year is to get on some people who know a lot about local government, because we don't know a lot about it. And because I feel it's not just recent. I've been feeling for years. I've been feeling a bit guilty. I feel like I don't really know exactly what councils should be doing, because it's clear that councils have huge constraints on them, and it's also clear that some councils manage to do some really interesting things. And so I don't really know, and we're planning to ask some people.
But mayors have opportunities to present themselves and to embody that.
Well, I think the thing about embodying, if I ask like what it is that the council in like Waltham Forest could have done differently, because I think the general consensus is, as the speaker said, the consensus is, well, they've done quite a good job, mainly because they felt constrained by their own knowledge and Stella Creasy's permanent anxiety about knowing it's a very left-wing area. So generally they have implemented like a pretty progressive programme, like across, as insofar as it was possible within constraints. But what they haven't ever done is really publicly say to people, look, the government's not giving us enough money to do everything we need to do, and that needs to be opposed on a national level. And so that is one of the things I would like to see I would like to see green councils explore the limits, and if they come up against limits, tell people what they are and where they're coming from,
and confront
very,
them
very explicitly. And I think I think that so there's an important role of political education there. I mean, I think on that question of the protest votes and the people's sort of imagination of the future, I think it's very important. I mean, this is a very simple point. It's a point I make over and over again. I basically write the same article for the Statesman or the Guardian like 2 or 3 times a year for the past sort of 15 years, basically, saying, look, people are pissed off. What are they pissed off about? They're pissed off about the consequences of neoliberalism. So if you want them to not be pissed, if they want them to believe that you're going to fix things, you have to tell them that you tell them you're going to end neoliberalism. And you have to have a narrative that includes that. And the reason why the Brexit narrative and the anti-migrant narrative is so powerful for the right is simply that. It's simply that it connects with people's lived experience. People have seen all this shit stuff happening for the past 50 years, and during that time, as they experience it, there's been really significant waves of migration. So it's very easy to make a causal argument that the one thing has caused the other, and so by stopping the one thing, you'll stop the other. And so it's not, but it's it's a thing I've been saying for years. We need left leadership that is willing to get up and say, look, things are absolutely, things are really broken, and it isn't just austerity. It isn't just the Tories. Actually, it's the whole way things have been done since we took a wrong turn in the mid-1970s. I mean, to be fair, to be clear, I mean, one reason I'm not as sceptical about Burnham as some people is because Burnham said all this in his interview in the New Statesman, and it's not something that any Labour leader, including Corbyn, actually, has ever said with any clarity, like in my lifetime. So I think that is really significant, but that has to be said. And I think we still don't know how many reform votes could be won back. But also Zach is saying it. I mean, Zach, and also I'm saying, well, Zach is saying it, and it's, we've seen what's happened. Yeah, that's why. I don't think, there are all kinds of cultural constraints and resource constraints on Zach really getting an audience with a lot of the people in those, the mill towns, etc. Which is why I think you're going to have a Labour leadership saying that same thing to those people to be able to win them back. But I think there's every chance of winning back a lot of those people away from reform if somebody can simply say, look, things have been going on in the wrong direction since 1975, since the adoption of the IMF structural adjustment programme by the Labour government in 1975. Things have been going in the wrong direction. We're going to fix that.
But I think I totally agree with that, but I suppose, I know sometimes we're both critical of a kind of politics that is reduced to kind of moral claims, but there's something about, obviously part of it, because politics is underpinned by moral claims, that certainly in the present moment, having someone like Polanski come out and simply, just say, I don't believe in killing people. We're not going to be wankers.
Well, that's true,
really
but I would also say that's also why
being consistent with that.
But that's also why Zach can't.
Right?
He can't win back the people in Wigan because they don't want to hear that.
No.
And it's not because they like killing people.
It's
not. Let me finish. It's not because they like killing people. It's because immediately it sounds like he's more concerned with those people over there.
No, I get that. But I'm using it as an example of a kind of broader attempt to represent that kind of some kind of rectitude, and to be consistent with it as well, because that's part of what people. I think people can respect that if they don't agree with all the policies. They can say, "Well, I respect that person's got a position and that they are holding to and stands for something." I think there's a lot of ground can be gained by holding.
Well, that's true, but I don't agree. It's because people care about the morality of politicians. I think that's because it indicates strength to people.
Yes.
And therefore, it indicates to people that when it comes to a fight, then that will have somebody worth leading you. Because this was Jeremy's big problem. This is Corbyn's problem. People didn't think he was going to fight for them when it came down to it.
I'm not sure we've come up with a policy programme for Hackney.
No, we haven't. But I think, I would say, the things I'm going to say are tediously obvious. Community wealth building, and I think the plans I've already heard from Hackney to create resources like credit unions and tenants associations and such are really good. I mean, so far everything I've heard sounds good, but I don't. I think broadly speaking, I think we know that what we would like councils to do, we would like councils to completely be in the front line of pushing back against the power of the most significant, the politically hegemonic force in Britain, which is landlords and the property sector, like much more even than in the States. Lots of people will have heard me say this before, but I was asked at the World Transformed a few years ago. Somebody said, I'd read your book, Hegemony Now. You said that the winners of the 20th century were the big tech and the finance sector, but would you have said the same thing if you were just talking about Britain? And I said, no, I'd have said the answer is landlords. Landlords are the people who won the 20th century. So pushing back against the landlords is crucial. But we always, when we're evaluating the politics of councils, we have to understand that councils all over the country have been pushed into dependency on relationships with developers because that's the only source of income they have to meet various needs, because they're underfunded by government, and because government won't even let them set a high enough council tax to actually fund services. So I think if councils do find themselves in that situation, that they should be willing to say to their residents and to their voters and their citizens, this is the situation we're in, and we need government to change policy. I think we need to, the first question about people's being motivated by resentment, and basically the point being, well, if it's the rich boomers, it's the rich old boomers who have gone really Tory. So how does that fit with the idea that it's because nothing has got better? I think that's a really fair point. I'm sort of inclined, and I'm partly inclined here to resort to the formulation from my good friend our friend Keir Milburn, who has been. There's a very optimistic formulation of the overall situation from a left perspective. But his account, he calls the boomers a defeated generation. He said really those people's experience of the past 60 years is that a lot of them were very radical. A lot of them did try to fight against Thatcherism, and they lost. And they basically accepted a kind of compromise, according to which, well, being kind of asset holders and being relatively culturally conservative would mean, well, at least they wouldn't starve to death. And maybe their kids would get to go to uni as long as they only wanted to do vocational courses that would get them jobs in marketing. So, that was a kind of defeat. They have experienced a kind of defeat, actually, on a grand historical scale. And certainly in those places in the north, even where those people are asset holders, are relatively comfortable, they have experienced what's happened, like the degradation of their towns, the sense of a loss of centrality, both in the culture and the economy. They have experienced it as defeat. They absolutely feel them. I mean, this is absolutely clear from sort of focus groups and all kinds of research and from the general culture. They experience themselves as defeated. Whereas actually, I think the people who are voting Green don't. The people who are voting Green experience ourselves, I should say. I mean, I voted Green. We experience ourselves as less defeated? We've experienced a defeat, but we haven't given up. We haven't. So I think that is an expression of that. So I think that is really important.
Does this come back to the earlier question about class, right? Because what we're saying is that the reform support is a more complicated alliance of different class fragments than might at first appear. I mean, it was certainly never simply the left behind red wall. It was a lot of suburban, like places in Norfolk.
Yeah.
People who are relatively well off and stable, but had these kind of fears and anxieties. But it is also then people in the small towns who feel very insecure. They might have some asset, might even own their house, but they're extremely worried about old age. They're extremely worried about whether services will come for them. They're extremely worried about how they're going to make it through, and they're frustrated by their inability to support kids particularly. And then there is this other kind of section, which is why I mentioned Yarmouth at the start, which didn't go reform, but is that kind of, which really is kind of like, has been kind of pushed out of an awful lot and is into kind of a deep crisis position that's just become maintained and administered by the state rather than addressed. So there are these different fractures there, and that's part of kind of defeating them, isn't it?
Well, it is, yeah. But also, I think to address the first questioner's point in a simpler way, of course, he was rightly pointing to the fact, I think implicitly, that my framework was only really talking about people who would want things to change. They would want them to, but they don't think it's possible. They would want them to, but they do think it's possible. Of course, there are a bunch of people who just don't want things to change because they're fine. And a lot of those people are voting Reform as well because they don't want things to change, because they're fine, because they're materially fine. So that is, and I think that there is actually, I think this is an important point, that there's a bunch of people who'll tell pollsters and focus groups they think the country's in crisis. They don't mean they're worried about their asset. They don't really. They mean that they know a lot of other people are really unhappy, and they're vaguely worried that could mean some threat to their assets eventually. They don't mean right now, like I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah, definitely. And we didn't say about the Tories.
Well, we're planning a whole series on conservatism. So we will get there. Yeah, we talked about it. We're planning a lot of things, that some of which may take like 3 years to come. But your point is right. I mean, in terms of the question about the Tories, I mean, yes. I mean, it's something that Alan talks about more than I do. Talks about in passing. I mean, Alan is more of a scholar of this than I am. But yeah, the headline is even the Tories now, in terms of the whole British right, is really shaped by spending a lot of time, like Alan, online watching American like conservatives. And I think, and that's true. I mean, basically the American. I think that Alan's broad thesis, which obviously I would just follow, is that the British right has been radicalised to the extent that it follows the American right very closely.
Yeah, that's part of what's driven the Conservative Party mad, but it's not able to capitalise on that in the way that Farage has, because Farage is getting the direct support from the Americans, although obviously Musk is supporting Lowe in Yarmouth. So that's, I mean, I won't go into it all because I want more questions, but if the question was about are they going to kind of align with Reform, I think there's a lot of entrenched interest in culture in maintaining the Conservative Party, but as I said earlier, its kind of social function has kind of disappeared for quite a lot of people, but it will continue to kind of exist. But I think it is drifting into this terrain where it represents a kind of increasingly shrill form of the kind of CPAC type conference sort of set of ideas.
And also to speak to the question, of course, I'm sorry, I should say, whenever I say I think we're heading towards a Reform government, I mean a Reform Tory coalition.
Yeah, it's always
there's no chance of a majority Reform government, really.
Yeah. Have we got time to take one more round? When do people want to go? What do you want? Well, I either get the 9:30 train or I get the 10:30. So
okay. I think we've got ready till 9:30. So it's basically people want another glass of wine. We've still got a little bit of time,
okay.
but at the same time, we can also take a few more.
I think we should take a few more.
You can maybe the answers can be rifled.
Let's take a lightning round, and Jeremy will answer them in 2 sentences.
Right.
Or less,
in which case, I'll take a few down
and not refer
here.
to the situation in the 1970s.
I have a lightning round question. What would be the minimum data set, or what would be the minimum standards that this if you're going to count Labour on the left, which I just don't anymore, what are the policies that can bring the left, as you see it, together to defeat Conservative Reform coalition?
Okay.
Privatisation of water, proportional nationalisation of water, nationalisation of water, and a national care service and proportional representation.
Brilliant.
I was going to say I door knocked in 2017 and 2019 in County Durham, then in the local elections here for the Greens. And in Durham for the Labour Party, everyone hated you. And it was kind of a surprise in the local elections this time round that people didn't open the door and just hate you. And one of the things I wanted to ask about is this demonisation of Zach Polanski. It worked really well of Corbyn in 2017 and 2019 because it mobilised a Tory vote in the North East in a way that had never happened before. What I wonder is how effective can that demonisation be to mobilise a right wing of a minor party who is not going to take over the Labour Party? Is it going to be effective in the same way?
Well, I think that first thing, that positive feeling is really important, because I think the opposition to the Greens doesn't understand the extent to which people are investing in the Greens and willing to give a chance and be supportive, and I think that's something that you can really make use of if you're in the council. But I think that also affects the extent to which that demonisation can work, because in a 5-party system where what you're seeking is precisely to hold on to your 25% or your 20%, actually the demonisation can become an advantage. The fact that you're being accused of defending all these terrible things like not killing people becomes a point of attraction for that part of the support. So it's a very different situation from when you were trying to reach a much higher percentage. So I would say plough that furrow.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're going to have a job persuading, but I think that's not really I mean, the question isn't, are you going to persuade a load of people who might have voted Green not to vote Green? The question is, are you going to motivate Tories to turn out? And that is a massive issue, because I would say, this is my sort of psychological analysis, ever since the 92 election, a really big issue for Labour has been how many casual Tories will turn out to stop you and how many will just stay home. And I would even say that's been the determining factor in pretty much every election. And I think that's one of the things. And one of the things that happens in 24 is nobody's really motivated to stop Starmer, and that is a sense in which the McSweeney strategy worked. Even though they didn't get the votes, they demotivated the opposition. Whether that can work against Polanski, obviously, it's less likely to succeed because there's very little chance of Zach becoming a prime minister. On the other hand, that won't stop the right-wing press telling people he might become prime minister or telling people he's some vague threat. That could motivate people. So it's a danger. I don't think there's much we can do about it.
So on the one hand, then, I mean, like what we're saying to the Green Council over here is, that being embedded in people's lives through council activity begins to refute that charge. That's an important part.
Yeah,
of
but
it.
that's not.
But presumably, also part of this is you talked about Zach Polanski ceasing to look so countercultural because he's on all the time. It's also the Greens also need to cultivate other people who become their national.
Yes, well, this is what I said
kinds.
to my friend the other day, who's kind of been involved in Green strategy. I mean, I think they really need. They've been making a lot of use of Hannah, but Hannah's she comes across as very charming. She doesn't come across as very authoritative. I think Sian should be out a lot more, because I think Sian actually comes across as more authoritative to a lot of people because she is more experienced and she's been around longer. So I think they do need to cultivate.
It also starts to kind of mitigate that the sort of the attempts to undermine and make them seem frightening if they're also just talking about schools policy.
Yes.
What is the schools policy? I don't know. If they are talking about other areas, right, that then people where it's harder to kind of demonise in that kind of way, it becomes a much bigger picture.
But that's not to say it's not a danger. And also, it's one of the things we need to, hopefully, if we can get like a soft left Labour leadership, we need to pressure them to completely withdraw from any of that demonisation of Zach and to try to counter it. Which I think,
and defend them.
Yeah, exactly, defend them. Which I think was very appealing. It's very appealing to voters, like to have a politician from another party say, "Don't be stupid." Like this person isn't the devil. They're just.
This is the lightning round.
Okay, yeah, let's go.
This is another question also about the sort of progressive coalition idea. You hear a bit about how people in the Greens would relate to Labour or Labour and the Greens, and maybe if Labour was captured by the soft left, and maybe if there was like a DSA-style network and so on and so forth, they could end up working together and maximising their vote. But what about the Lib Dems? Like, what role do you sort of see in a progressive alliance for the Lib Dems? And yeah, are they needed?
Yeah, well, you have to. The Lib Dems have to be part of it, and the Lib Dems have to be offered something, and they have to be sort of challenged to not be part of it. Like if they, you have to. This is what I've always said. You have to get to a point where you can say publicly to the Lib Dems, well, are you going to join in with this thing, or are you going to let the fascists run the country? So I think it's like that. But the Lib Dems, we don't really have time to go into all the details, but. You can't, numerically, there is no coalition that can stop the right without the Lib Dems. It's a complete fantasy. Anyway, you just have to look at the numbers. So they have to be part of it. I think you also have to understand the Lib Dems themselves don't really know what Lib Dems are for. So you have to tell them. Instead, you have to tell them. What people on the left who don't want to deal with the Lib Dems complain about the fact, they're liberals. They're not radical socialists like me and my friends. That's true. But that's why you have to tell them what to do, basically. And a lot of them, if you offer them something, you have to give them a stake in the project, like proportional representation. You ought to be able to bring them on board. So I think that's the answer. You have to try to bring them on. They have to be on board. You have to not sort of go into it with a kind of left inferiority complex, which assumes that any sort of coalition with liberals means you're just deferring to them. You're trying to get them to do something. You offer them something in return, and you threaten to publicly expose them as colluding with fascism if they don't do it. Simple.
Okay.
Jeremy, I remember you've said like a few months ago that you were expecting the Greens to get a huge surge in popularity, I think during 2025, on the basis of much greater concern about climate in the middle classes. And yeah, that's not the kind of rationale that's in effect. Are we still due for that? Like, are we going to get a revenge of climate politics? Should we be trying to anticipate or prepare the ground for that?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I just recently saw a prediction for a super El Nino towards the end of this year, which is, and like with concomitant like extreme weather. Then again, we had those fires in California a year ago. So but clearly it can't keep getting worse ad infinitum without some sort of climate reckoning. Surely it will have to come back in some form. It's just weird that the Greens aren't kind of heralding that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with all your reasoning. I suppose I would say sort of pessimistically, but not pessimistically, given where the Greens are now. There's very little evidence from the past 50 years of world history that you can ever make climate a really top salient issue with an electorate, except when you've got very advanced social democracy. Because the only place it's ever really happened for any length of time is Northern Europe, basically. So I think the evidence is you have got to be in a position where people feel like their sort of basic socioeconomic needs are being met to the same level that they were being met, like within living memory. Then before you can get people to start really addressing the climate. So I think the implicit logic of the Polanski strategy that really we have to focus on that for now, and that is because we are concerned about climate, because we know that climate is urgent. We need to really have the social democratic restoration immediately, because we've had decades of trying to convince people of the urgency of the climate crisis, and we just can't. The evidence is we just can't. So I would tend to say probably not. Probably it's not really going to happen, or if it does happen, it will keep happening in this kind of spasmodic way of things like Extinction Rebellion that doesn't really have any political impact. But then I wouldn't be surprised if it does happen for exactly the reasons you gave. So I'm having it both ways.
Yeah, no, I think the climate hasn't been seemingly a salient issue in this round of elections, but I think it's still at the back of many people's minds all the time. It's still there. But I think part of the problem is that maybe this is a very UEA-centric way, because we've got a lot of climate people. Climate politics became, on the one hand, very high-level bureaucratic and technocratic, and people couldn't really engage with that. Or it became very panicked apocalyptic. People couldn't really engage with that. But I think where it comes out is where it gets connected to this anxiety that something is breaking down, not just the climate, but society and the social contract as well. And if you can draw that connection and say that part of what you're trying to do is to rebuild the fabric, and the fabric is both social and ecological at the same time, and the two go together, you begin to get traction. But you need to find a way in which you can do that that connects to people.
Yes. Partly, that's why water is such a pivotal issue, isn't it? Because water completely connects in people's minds immediately, like the failed legacy of Thatcherism, with a really visible and disgusting, form of environmental degradation.
Yeah, focusing on a kind of concrete enemy rather than the enemy being a sort of an abstract process that is expressed through charts from the UN. It's these people here creaming the money off, polluting the water.
Right, I'm going to be saying one last question for this very patient gentleman down here, and then we can wrap up at 9.
Okay.
That's okay. Thank you. I just want to bring things back to the PR discussion. I'm very much in favour of this as a way to kind of reform the British system. But the truth, unfortunately, is that I've lived most of my adult life in Germany under a PR system, and what I've lived under there is mostly these kind of grand coalition governments between the centre left and the centre right. And unfortunately, on the British left, we don't seem to have much of a conversation about that possibility here, which is a real possibility. How can we inoculate ourselves, basically, from that happening here? Because it's not just something that the Labour Party could potentially do, or the Conservative parties. Greens could also get involved with this. The Lib Dems can also get involved with something like this. So again, how can we focus on the progressive bloc that we've been talking about today and avoid the grand coalition politics of Germany?
Well, those are two completely different questions, really. I mean, I think it's very important to understand about PR. PR won't solve a single problem, like except first past the post, which is a big problem. No, but of course it's true that the political dynamics are not that different in lots of countries that do have PR, but almost all of those countries have just simply not seen the neoliberal project advance with anything like the intensity and depth that it has done in this country. And that's partly because even those grand coalitions have not dared to allow it to advance as far as it has here, because they had to maintain support of too broad a coalition. But I think, the political question is just the broader political question is simply always the question of hegemony. It's like how you have to try to construct an aggregate coalition of forces which can pull in the direction that you want. And there's no magical solution to that. There's no magical formula which will tell you before a given historical moment like how you do that. I mean, you just have to be conscious that that's what you need to do. And I completely agree. It's really a danger. I think right now, we do have a historic opportunity because centrism has so drastically collapsed, both ideologically and institutionally. I think it is true if we could get PR and a left coalition government after the next election. I think the abject state of centrist politics now would mean it would take them a decade to recover properly and to start to try to do that kind of thing, and that would give the left an opportunity to say that the left rather than the centre is the alternative to fascism. So I think we do have a historic opportunity predicated on the complete collapse of the centrist right now, which we should seize really, because as you rightly say, like the norm really in a northern European country with PR is that they do exactly as you described.
Well, one kind of footnote partly, which is that I've been really worried for a long time that the new mayoral elections that will be coming in a few years' time, including in Norfolk, Suffolk, would go to reform because they weren't going to be PR. But this government has introduced supplementary vote. Those mayoralties will be supplementary vote, so there is a kind of opening on the PR kind of front. But it's not a panacea. It doesn't solve all these problems. It just creates different kind of problems, but also different kind of opportunities. But I think it's also worth pushing that sense of coalition politics a bit further. It's not just about coalitions of parties, it's about whether there are already coalitions underneath and within and between parties that are forming, and that's part of what I think makes this moment interesting. The flip side of that sort of falling apart of parties' embeddedness in people's cultural economic lives, that brings a fragmentation and a chaos, also brings a potential kind of energy. I mean, I imagine, in a sense, I suppose what I'm saying is this is the coalition already, part of it in this room. I'm sure I could talk to each one of you and find something I would disagree with you about. But actually, we're all here because there's more that we agree about, and part of it is sticking to that. And while you may be party members or not and vote for this or that, we're able to make, as you said, we're able to make judgments about who in this context am I going to lend my vote to get this happening, and how am I going to then keep those people on track and be part of, not just harassing them, but working with them where I can and to get these kinds of things done. You said earlier we've got to tell the Lib Dems, we've kind of got, no disrespect to our elected officials in the room, we've got to tell them all what to do. Yeah, and be part of then doing it. And my feeling is that's where the possibility is, if we're able to have that, to somehow kind of hold in a sense two slightly contradictory feelings. One is, there's going to be parties, and that's going to mean party discipline of kinds and getting things done, but we're also going to be radically pluralist people at the same time, thinking about the different strategies and approaches and things that we can do. And we're going to realise that we have to do that and be really militant about that, because if we don't, as Jeremy said, we've got fascists waiting to come in. I think we'll end it on that.
Fantastic. So before I... Oh, okay, no.
I just want to say, we haven't touched on the Labour leadership at all, but we are doing, mostly for people who can't come to London, we're doing this basically on Zoom at 6 o'clock on Friday this week, and we will take all questions about the Labour leadership.
I thought you were going to start with it in the 1970s there again.
Elections and the sub-national ones too. Nothing good rhymes with elections except maybe factional sections, but we don't like